Kristopher Lorren here. I'm a court-appointed special advocate. I'm a house manager for young men ages 18 to 25 who have aged out of the foster care system to kind of guide them, with life skills, help them get jobs, transportation, that sort of thing, schooling. Um, I'm also a staff at church, and I'm a grant writer for food banks. So this has been a slow process. My life is not always like that. I also have experience inside the Arkansas Department of Corrections, and not for good purposes. However, on the good side of things, my Associate of Science in Criminal Justice, my bachelor's degree in Criminal Justice, Criminology, and Sociology, along with my master's studies in Emergency Management, has contributed to this study. Now, on the top here, we see the Arkansas Comprehensive Emergency Management Plan, ARCEMP, written by Governor Sanders, which is the daughter of previous Governor Mike Huckabee. Now, the ARCEMP does have a plan. It has a strategy for disaster, but we're going to compare the picture of the left of me sitting on a rock to the OPP on the right, which is the New Orleans Parish Prison. We're going to call it OPP for the time's sake. Now, the New Orleans Parish Prison, OPP, we're going to look at, so what's the number one destroyer of natural disasters? Flooding. So water could come through, sweep me, no matter how heavy that rock is, completely away. Water could inundate that facility. It could also cause damage, or it could, depending on the amount of water, completely destroy and bring down the OPP. So next, we're going to look at the layout of the Arkansas Department of Corrections, just one unit, 2 units, in one place. This is the women's facility on the left, which is the layout you see, and that is called the McPherson unit. On the right-hand side is the Grimes unit, and that's for men, incarcerated men. Now, I wanted you to get a picture also of the inside of a barracks, what they call a barracks in ADC. And this would actually be a real picture from inside the Grimes unit. So I wanted you to kind of just get that so you got a good idea of what we're dealing with. Now, those that are incarcerated, they have revealed that they are highly vulnerable and highly susceptible to severe mental damage, physical damage, because there's no mobility here. They're stuck in one place, and while all these natural disasters are happening outside, they have no idea of what's going to happen to them next. So that's part of my illustration or argument, if you will, here, is that they need someone to stand up for them and say, hey, look, we have seen what happened during Hurricane Katrina at the OPP. And so I just wanted you to see the desperateness of this man behind bars and the pictures of the storm. So you get a good idea of what this defense of this white paper is about. So the natural and fundamental risk of incarcerated individuals continues to increase, vulnerabilities due to crises, and the historical failure of Hurricane Katrina as an example of OPP showed severe systemic emergency management failures due to leadership and the lack of planning, the lack of training, a lot of things that we're going to get into here. So the comparative analysis, this is the paper, and it's to compare the OPP, emergency management deficiencies, the 4 phases, to the ARCEMP and how it's going to affect ADC in the case of a disaster. Now, the goal is to identify the best practices to improve correctional emergency management strategies And the significance of the study, it goes beyond an academic inquiry. This is an examination of experience that I've been through and the studies that I've witnessed, secondary research, and it's the state's duty to protect all citizens, whether incarcerated or not, before, during, and after a crisis. So at the top here, we see a picture of the OPP after the flooding. The water has receded at this point. Now, on the bottom picture is a picture of the abandoned facility from the inside compared to just what you just seen in the Grimes unit. This is what it can turn into. So now we're going to look at developmental effective strategies, develop paths of more effective and ethical emergency management strategies. So we have the focus on life preservation. This study is not theoretical, but rather it's about saving lives. So lives are at stake here. And it's the duty to protect these lives of individuals within the state, regardless of their circumstances. So the examination of the OPP failures, as illustrated here, and the lessons learned through logistical and ethical failures compared to the ARCEMP. So we see the vulnerability of incarcerated populations as we've seen in the desperation of the man in the previous slide. And we're going to examine these vulnerabilities, incarcerated populations due to continuous confinement. And here it is, limited mobility during a disaster, a natural disaster. They can't go anywhere. They're stuck. They're completely reliant upon us to get them out of there. They're completely reliant upon the ARCEMP to help the ADC, which we see there on the bottom. Now, they identify best practices. So examine and identify the best practices for improvement in correctional EM strategies, and it's the state's responsibility to examine all and protect all citizens that are incarcerated and all individuals in natural disaster. So in the top here, we see the illustration of what actually happened during Hurricane Katrina. So once Hurricane Katrina had hit and they were trying to we had inmates, not just inmates, but staff and their families. We had guards and their families, administration and their families. They were left behind. It wasn't just the inmates. So we see boats coming up here to pick them up and get them to safety, and we'll get there here in a moment. So let's look at the core problem. The core problem is that there is a lack of protocols in natural disasters for correctional units. Now, the research goal was to determine plans that are sufficient to protect inmates, staff, and the public, which I've seen in the ARCEMP. And the justification is by increasing the frequency and intensity of natural disasters that we've seen here lately, we need to get on top of this. We need to take action. So there's also an urgency for disaster preparedness in Arkansas due to the fault line of the earthquakes. If an earthquake hits like the picture here on below, it's going to cause some major damage on the fault line. We will see correctional facilities fall. We will see them split, damaged. The top there is what happened during a hurricane, what can happen. So, and that's not counting the flooding that happens during a hurricane. The OPP failures, there is documentation that we're going to look at of catastrophic and systemic failures of OPP and Katrina, and the consequences, they just continued to escalate without plans to protect these incarcerated populations. Now, the ARCEMP prepares for various hazards through the use of resources and disaster preparedness as responders work to save lives, to prioritize people over property, people over policy, people over leadership and politics and things that can get in the way of getting this done. So we will look at the next one and we see deficiency. So I use secondary data um, with this white paper, and the ARCEMP, it lacks. So the problem here in comparison to the catastrophic failure of the OPP during Hurricane Katrina is that the ARCEMP lacks real world implementation. So in other words, it lacks practical application. There's a gap in ARCEMP's studies to utilize the qualitative comparative analysis and secondary research to create this case study is what I used. And it's primarily focused, again, on the contrast between the two. So the methodological approach was the study grounded in this research-driven correctional policy development and a qualitative comparative research designed by analyzing the documentations and reports to identify these patterns and discrepancy between planned and actual responses. So this is my primary argument right here, is the lack of practical application of the ARCEMP was created, and there's a knowledge gap regarding its performance in the disaster scenario. In the study, we hope to address this knowledge gap. So the literature review was a synthesis of secondary, again, data, the challenges of managing a correctional facility during times of crises. So these are two pictures here. One is what inside the OPP since it has closed. The ethical frameworks that were used, some of them are named here. Of course, we will get to the reference page as well, but it was to, have an equal resource distribution and prioritize these vulnerable populations through mitigation plans. And so although we have plans in the ARCEMP, the leadership thought they had a plan as well. But there's legal and human rights perspectives, and there's constitutional, fundamental individual rights to someone that has been exposed to the Hurricane Katrina. So this is documented that there was actual constitutional rights that were violated through, for example, here the ADA, the rehabilitation, the title, the Civil Rights Act of 1964, their prevention methods to stop this type of discrimination against these vulnerable populations. So, what's the problem? The problem is we lack, in our ARCEMP, we lack the emergency. We got the planning, but we lack the training and practical application at the correctional facilities displayed earlier inside those barracks. So what can we do? The need for comprehensive preparedness, mitigation, response, and recovery strategies, the 4 phases of EM, or emergency management, and we must consider the unique needs of each correctional facility as each one has different levels. So the lack of empathy and respect we're going to see here on the next one for these individuals and families, as we noticed earlier, and I implied earlier in the picture what actually happened. That really did happen. We're going to look at it now. So here it is. We have the New Orleans TV station with Sheriff Marlon Guzman. He would not allow the OPP to evacuate. And again, he left not just inmates behind, but as you can see there, we've got sheriff's deputies, we've got guards, we have families that were left behind and children that were left behind, and he said it on live television, we're going to leave them where they belong. He did not mention the unethical, gross, grotesque, inhumane idea that he would leave staff, much less the human beings, because of course they made a mistake in life. But we had people that were scattered, the mental health effects beyond the ethical considerations, we had people that were scattered all throughout the Louisiana criminal justice system, from people who just were awaiting trial to people who simply owed for child support, down to people that were there for life, for murder. So they were all scattered all together due to these people who didn't know what to do. They had a plan, but they wasn't willing to implement it because they weren't prepared. So here's a picture of what the final outcome was. They ended up getting them from the OPP to the interstate highway that was high enough to get away from the flooding. And so here, just take this in, get a little glimpse of the amount and the of catastrophe here. We see the boats to the top left. We see that the trees, the water is high as the trees, if not higher. And, there's vans that probably transported resources. So here we see the deficiency again. I'm going to go over it just one more time just so that it kind of sinks in. We got the governor here, and Governor Sanders is to she needs to send experts from the Arkansas Division of Emergency Management to train people in these barracks with IPAWs and CERT teams. It can be done virtually through the kiosk, or we could actually send the emergency management professionals in there to train the top 10 or top 15 men or women as primary leaders to help lead those during a catastrophe, along with the guards, because there are people in there who can be trusted. Unlike what most people think, like if you're locked up, you can't be trusted. No, when it comes down to life or death situations, we can trust these people to do the right thing. They just need the training and the drills that will add this practical application. And then the involvement of medical needs, the logistics and the cost, we have to consider that, and public safety. So there'll have to be a logistical route to get them to where we need to get them to. And it may not need to be necessarily public information, but it does need to be done. So the necessity for also continuous improvement in these emergency management strategies to decrease this cruel and unusual punishment that we've seen at the OPP. And I thank you for your time and consideration in this matter. We'll take a glimpse at the references here. And I will be Kristopher Lorren once again signing out. And thank you for considering my white paper defense.